Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the minister again. Minister, I believe that you did indicate that you actually visited the facilities at Simpson Hall and you saw the operation for yourself, and you've obviously had conversation with the providers, and you've spoken with some of the individuals who are now taking the place of the counselors and so on who are providing the support programs. I guess my question to you, Minister, when you were there, how many residents were at the facility?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
It was early in the morning that there were people there from as part of the contingency plan. There were staff that were still there. Most of the residents had gone during their usual daily routine, which could be to go to adult service centres where they perform work, or they went to other facilities in Dartmouth where they spend their days. As much as possible, an attempt is made to try to keep their routine normal, such as you can under the circumstances, but the member opposite is quite right. The residents find it very difficult, not only with the changes in service providers, but also that the picketing is very difficult for them, and it's difficult for their families, and it's difficult for the picketers. So it's not a wonderful situation, but under the circumstances, this is the best we're able to do.
The member for Dartmouth North.
I don't know if the minister has received phone calls or persons contacting them with respect to some of the concerns that may be going on there even today at Simpson Hall. But I'm wondering if the minister is aware and if his department is certainly looking at the level of services that are provided. I understand that there are some persons who are under the care of RJF, I believe you said, under the care of RJF. Some of them are wearing different clothing and that's not theirs. They're getting the clothing mixed up. They're wearing hearing aids upside down. There's a whole host of behavioral functions that are going on in there. And I'm wondering if your department is, you did indicate that you were being kept abreast daily on this. So I'm wondering if you've visited, I believe on day one, I believe that you were there, if you've actually gone back and visited the facilities unannounced at any other time since this strike has been taking place.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I would like to point out to the member opposite that actually this is of course not the only place where the residents are staying. On that day there was 27. And I think that number fluctuates up and down depending on the circumstances. About half, 20, of the small options homes are still open, although they've been licensed to accommodate more people in them. And the supervised apartment program continues. And as the member opposite would be aware, the families, as best they can, and with the support that's made available to them from the service provider, RRSS, also have taken back some for the duration of the strike. But with reference to your comment, most of the feedback I've had since then has been through the families and through staff. But if I was to go out again and look at some of the sites, it would not necessarily be to Simpson Hall, because I would also have an interest in the group homes and the supervised apartments and indeed the families. I mean, there's a lot that one would like to do, and I'm doing what I can.
The member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And earlier, the minister had indicated that there was a contingency plan. So the minister obviously knows that the union gave sufficient notification that there was going to be a strike and that strike action was going to take place on such and such a date, and that the minister obviously, or his department, must have met with the board to discuss this issue. And obviously there must have been a crafted contingency plan, in which the minister referred to earlier. My question to the minister is, if there has been a crafted contingency plan in which the minister and his department went over to make sure that that plan was going to stand the test of time, if that minister could table that contingencies plan to this legislature.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Again, I would point out that the RRSS is the one that produced the contingency plan, and in fact it was the notice consideration that led to the setting up of alternative arrangements. That was the whole point of it, because of the vulnerability of the residents and the difficulty in accepting change, not only of their in their home, but also to some extent, of course, with the service providers. And I say to some extent because the management would still be there and providing service, so there would be some continuity, but not nearly the continuity that was there clearly before the strike. And it was in fact the possibility of a sudden disruption and the lack of a specified assurance that the RRSS would be given sufficient time to put this in place by the union that led to the moving out of the residents prior to the strike.
The member for Dartmouth North.
Again, Mr. Minister, your department, not yourself directly, but your department has obviously been involved with the board on this contingency plan. Surely somewhere there must be a plan that has been crafted, written, and a procedure which you're going to follow by. I guess my question is once again to you, Minister, if there has been such a plan, or if there isn't, if it was just simply a conversation or a talk with the board, and we know that the board is responsible for crafting the plan, but obviously the minister would have a copy of the plan to make sure that nothing would go awry. So my question is there a plan that can be tabled in this legislature?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Again, the plan would be owned by RRSS, and it would not be appropriate for the department or the minister to interject themselves into these difficult labor negotiations. And the plan is part of RRSS's attempt to maneuver through difficult times in assisting the residents through the labor disruptions. So I think that I would refer you to RRSS.
I recognize the member from Dartmouth South who has a little over 5 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Minister, I know the role that the board of directors of RRSS plays in this. The question is that now that RJF is involved, is the money going from the Department of Community Services to RRSS and then off to RJF? And if it is, and if it's coming directly from the Community Services purse and bypassing RRSS, then the minister is responsible, and the minister should have a copy of the contingency plan, which can be provided to this legislature. And what is the plan? It's a question. We want to know what the rates are being paid. We want to know the competency of the staff. We want to know how you devise that plan. And we can sit here and talk about whose responsibility it was, or whose responsibility it is. But ultimately, Minister, it comes to your department to make sure that such a plan exists and such a plan is workable, and such a plan here should be able to be tabled.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, not to belabor the point, but I think that I'm going to direct the member opposite to RRSS. If they wish to release their plan to the honourable member, then that would be their decision. He's right, they're a non-profit agency providing community supports for adults, and I think that Bev Wicks and her staff, management, and union members have provided a wonderful service to those residents. In terms of the funding arrangements that you're asking about, I would advise the member opposite that it's done on a per diem basis, and as of this point in time, we have not had any requests from RRSS for anything different than the regular per diem.
The member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess that we do know that this is costing a lot of money to the Department of Community Services. And we do know that it's week 3 into the strike. And I guess my question would be, does the government have any idea of what this arrangement is costing them to date? And can you tell us the cost to date of that arrangement with RJF?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Again, I would point out that the arrangement between RJF, an employment services company, and RRSS is between them, just as the labor dispute is between the union and RRSS, not the Department of Community Services. And to reiterate my earlier comment, there is a per diem arrangement that is in place for those residents, and as of this date, I am advised that there have been no additional requests for more financial support from RRSS.
I recognize the member from Dartmouth North who has a little under 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the minister. The minister knows that this is a line item in the budget. This is costed. The minister knows that if he had not anticipated a strike, and obviously he would not have, he would have hoped that the negotiations would have gone on the way that they normally would, and there would have been sufficient money in the pot to address the issues that were brought to the bargaining table. Now, I guess my question is to the minister, what impact does this have on the budget? What's the additional cost to the Department of Community Services for this 3-week strike?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
As I indicated to the member previously, as of this date, we've had no indication from RRSS that they will be looking for anything more from the Department of Community Services. I would also point out to the member opposite that his point about there being sufficient monies to fund the sector, that 3 other unions did settle previous to the strike, and there were a number of others that we felt were close to settling on that package that was put forward. So it is not that everybody was not agreeable with what was put in the budget. It's just regretfully, in this case, possibly because RRSS was at the higher end of the wage scale when the new $13.70 was put in place, that they have not been able to come to an agreement. But that clearly is between the union, its members, and RRSS.
Member from Dartmouth North has 10 seconds to wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In that case, what is your department prepared to do to get negotiations back at the table?
Thank you. Time has ended for the NDP caucus. And I recognize the member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to start with the budget supplement, page 4.6. I want to go to the Minister on the community support for adults. Mr. Minister, on page 4.6 of the supplementary detail, there's a reduction of $81,900 in long-term care. Could the Minister please explain this reduction, please?
I recognize the Minister of Community Services.
A couple of the large institutions, Scotia ARC and Halifax RRC, were funded out of that, and so with the institutionalization, it shifted off into small options in other areas of the budget.
The member for Clare.
Mr. Chairman, also on page 4.6, under the budget line, community-based options, we note that this budget line has been increased by $4 million. Could the Minister provide us with a breakdown of this $4 million increase?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The member opposite should be aware that some of it is because of staff that had, or residents that had moved into that area. Part of it was wage increases, and actually the member speaks of a $4 million increase, but actually in estimate to estimate it's a $9 million increase.
The member for Clare.
Maybe the minister could clarify, residents moved in from where?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
From the two small from the two facilities that were closed in that fiscal year that I mentioned in my first answer.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could the minister please indicate how many community-based option service providers are currently going through contract negotiations?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The member opposite that there are 27 unions involved in this, and of course there are also non-unionized employees, and covering about 5,000 care workers in total with various qualifications.
The member for Clare.
I guess my question, and I'll try to be a little clearer, could the minister provide us with an indication how many community-based option service providers are currently going through negotiations?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
There's a total of 27 unions, and again, that does not cover all the care providers to the sector. 3 have settled thus far, and there were a number of others that were close to settlement prior to the strike.
The member for Clare.
So, Mr. Minister, through you, Mr. Chairman, if I understand this correctly, 3 have settled, and out of 27, am I correct? So currently we still have 24 outstanding providers that needs to go through negotiations.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
To be absolutely specific on that, that would be the unionized providers. That's not the entire 5,000. There's a mix of union and non-union.
The member for Clare.
So I understood correctly, the minister indicated there were 27 unionized providers, right? Is that correct? 27 unionized providers?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
There are 27 unions. Now, it is conceivable that there could be more than one union with a provider, and I would be pleased to get the member that information if that was important to him.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly would appreciate if the minister, at his convenience, if he could provide us with that information. My next question, Mr. Chairman, could the minister please indicate whether he has indeed provided a cap on salary negotiations with regional residential services?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Of the 378 providers all over the province, a package has been put together which, as the member opposite has heard from me previously, provides geographic wage parity right across the province. So that would be the package that has been made available to them.
The member for Clare.
I just want to be clear here, Mr. Chairman. We've been hearing the minister for the last couple of weeks talking about a 2%. Is this the cap that the minister is referring to? I guess that would be my first question. My second question would be, has the department, through the minister, put a cap on salary negotiations with the with regional residential services? That would be my second question.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I thank the member opposite for his question. There is provision for an increment in the budget, but that is the budget line item, and the member opposite would know what that would mean.
The member for Clare.
I'll try again. I would like to know, through you to the minister, if the minister could indicate to the committee members if through his department, if a cap has been indeed been indicated by his department through these salary negotiations with regional residential services. So I'll try again. Has a cap been indicated by this minister through these salary negotiations?
I recognize the Minister of Community Services.
The wage package, of course, honourable member, has been conveyed to the sector, and they would be aware of the package.
The member for Clare.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'll try something else. Could the minister please describe the directives that his government has given to RRSS and other similar agencies for appropriate wage increases?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, honourable member. The increments are 2%, 2%, 2%. A pension plan, cost shared between the employer and the employees, and an enhanced benefits package in terms of the employer picking up a larger percentage of the premiums.
The member for Clare.
Mr. Chairman, we've been hearing this for the last several weeks. In terms of, we've been hearing that the department has no involvement with these individuals that are on strike. At the same time, we know that the funding comes directly from this minister's budget in order to provide that service to these residents. At the same time, if I'm reading this correctly, the minister is indicating that there is a cap of 2% for this year and 2% for next year and 2% for the following year. Does that cap apply right across the board to all service providers?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
The honourable member would perhaps be aware that the way that we fund the service providers is through a per diem allotment. So as a resident, a client is assessed for needing a certain amount of level of care, and that is made up in a per diem, which would include primarily wages, but also other operating expenses, and that is what is provided to the service providers, and it is then up to the service providers to take that per diem and negotiate with their employees, whether they be union or non-union.
The member for Clare.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could the minister please indicate whether any small option agencies plan to increase the number of small options homes this year? If the minister could indicate whether any small option agencies plan to increase the number of small options home this year.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
This is something that would be negotiated between the 378 providers and the department, and they would make application to do so through the department. So it is part of the budgeting process.
The member for Clare.
So at this stage, as I understand, there's no request before the department to increase the number. Is that correct?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
with the deinstitutionalization, particularly with those two large facilities in Halifax, there was some growth in the small options area as a result to accommodate those residents. And of course, as emergencies come up, we make provision for them.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could the minister then indicate whether any agencies are planning to close any small options home this year? Is the department aware of any agencies planning to close any small options home this year?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I'm not aware that there's plans to close any of them.
The member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chairman, I want to go back to the Regional Residential Service Society. Mr. Chairman, as we have been debating in this House for probably the past 2 weeks and probably a little more, we know that these workers, these councillors, these group home workers have been asking for wage parity. We know people who do the exact work in institutions here in HRM are earning $4 or $5 more than they are. You know, these individuals are currently earning $13.70 an hour, and others are working, especially at the Emerald Hall here at the Nova Scotia Hospital, and they're earning somewhere around I think it's $18.90 or $18.95 thereabout. My first question, could the minister please explain why he feels that workers who are employed by an agency directly and fully funded by his department should make less than a person doing the exact same job working in a position that is funded directly by the Department of Health?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
There's a number of clarifications that should be made there. First of all, I want to make it clear that the employees of the various service providers are not employees of the Department of Community Services, although the Department of Community Services does fund the sector. That would be my first qualification. The second one is the assumption that those employees in Emerald Hall have a comparable job description. That is something that is being advanced, I understand, by the union as part of their negotiations. I would suggest to the member, though, that the 32 people that work in that facility are not the comparator. The comparator would presumably be the 5,000 that work in community supports for adults sector.
The member for Clare.
All right, Mr. Chairman, does the minister agree? Does the minister agree that the workers, that the RRSS workers are not entitled to wage parity?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
As has been pointed out many times in the last number of weeks here, in fact, they do have geographic wage parity amongst community supports for adults workers right across the province.
The member for Clare.
Mr. Chairman, again, we know that there are individuals in this area that are doing the exact same work, that are being paid a lot more per hour than these councillors, these group home workers are earning. And my question to the minister, does he believe that these workers are not entitled to wage parity? Does he agree or doesn't he agree?
I recognize the Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Honourable Member. Again, I would point out that this government came up with the $28 million to provide that geographic wage parity. And as I mentioned earlier with the NDP critic, that in fact for the workers that are the, what's the name of it? Regional, what's the RRSW? What's the RR stand for? The residential rehabilitation workers, in fact, on average, got a 78% increase in their wages from the start of this initiative to the conclusion. So that's what happened with the $28 million, and of course that continues on, and we were prepared to augment that in our funding to the sector.
The member for Clare.
Mr. Chairman, this strike has been ongoing. It certainly has been disrupting many lives of loved ones. A question to the minister, and we have been asking, for quite some time now. I'm wondering if this minister is planning to do anything to help to get management and these workers back to the bargaining table. Yes or no?
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I've indicated before, substantial monies were put into the sector, and indeed again in this fiscal year, there were substantial additional monies put in to the budget in the line item for the purposes of bringing about a successful conclusion to negotiations in the sector by properly funding the various service providers.
Thank you, Minister. I recognize the member from Clare.
I'll try to put it a little more clearer. Is this minister planning to do anything to bring this strike to an end?
Thank you for the question. The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I would point out that in fact, substantial monies have already gone into this sector to fund the various service providers. And indeed, I would remind the member opposite that the collective agreements have been reached with 3. There were others that were close, and a great many of the 378 service providers are without unions, and they would have been afforded the same package.
Thank you, Minister. I recognize the member from Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the minister is fully aware of some of the anger, some of the frustrations from some of these families, from some of the residents, even from some of these group home workers. What does he plan to do to resolve this impasse, I guess, during this ongoing strike?
Thank you. Direct that question to the Minister of Community Services.
In anticipation that there could be a disruption in services, as has been discussed with the honourable member for the NDP, a contingency plan was put in place on the part of RRSS, and at this point in time they are focused entirely on trying to make this as easy as possible on the residents and their affected families. And the department has care coordinators that are in visiting with the families, visiting with the residents under difficult circumstances to try to do whatever they can to make this less disruptive for them. And this is the best that we can do under the collective bargaining arrangements that are in place.
Thank you, Minister. And member from Clare.
Mr. Chairman, could the minister indicate to the members of this committee who is funding this contingency plan? Is it RRSS or the Department of Community Services?
Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This would come from the per diem that is assigned to each of the residents. And as I indicated earlier, thus far, we have no request from RRSS for any additional monies.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Clare.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I understand this correctly, if the strike goes on and on and on, does that mean that the contingency plan will be funded by the agency and not by the Department of Community Services?
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Community Services.
As the member would be aware, we fund the sector, and it is done through a budgeting process where the cost of caring for each of the residents is worked out. In this particular case, a full-time equivalent for a residential care worker is at $28,500, and plus there's additional increments that have been factored into this. And based on the level of care for the individual resident, a per diem would be derived from this, and it is that per diem that goes to the nonprofit community supports for adults care providers.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could the minister indicate to us, especially, and I'm sure that the department is much aware of the contingency plan that's in place. We've heard the minister a number of times standing up in this House talking about visiting some of these residents. Could the minister indicate to us how much has been spent additional, I guess, in terms of additional costs, how much additional cost has it cost for the last 2 weeks?
Thank you for the question. Recognize the Minister of Community Services.
Again, as I think I may have indicated previously, to the best of our knowledge, there has been no additional requests coming from RRSS, and so therefore we have continued to pay them the agreed per diem.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. Recognize the member from Clare.
Mr. Chairman, we know that this strike is ongoing and probably will continue tomorrow. We don't know for how long. We hope, I'm sure everyone in this House hope, that this strike will come to an end soon. But in order to do this, Mr. Chairman, the Premier is going to have to step in. I just want to refer back to an article that appeared last week, Chronicle Herald. And one of the family member indicated it's time for the Premier to step in, she said. He is the only one that can bring these two parties together and get all these helpless, vulnerable people back into their homes. Now, I guess my question would be, has the Premier been requesting from this Minister of Community Services to try to resolve this strike as soon as possible, I guess? Has the Minister been advised or requested by the Premier or the Premier's office to try to resolve this current labour dispute?
The Minister of Community Services.
As the former Minister of Environment and Labour, I have some appreciation for the labour laws in this province. And as the member opposite would be aware that in fact this labour dispute is between an employer, RRSS, and their union. So as such, there is no place for other parties to be getting involved at the negotiating table.
Thank you, Minister. Order, please. The member from Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as we're all aware, there's an impasse. The residents, the families, and the workers, are looking at this Premier, this government for leadership. We are at an impasse, and we need to resolve this strike, hopefully in the near future. Now, to do that, as I've indicated earlier, this family member that was quoted in the Herald indicated it's time for the Premier to step in and either tell this minister, to give this minister or provide him with some direction, but so far we have seen nothing. So, of course, Mr. Chairman, we have heard many people indicating that unfortunately the workers don't want to go back to the bargaining table. But it takes two sides to resolve this dispute. Mr. Chairman, we're aware that talks have broke down. We have a lot of people that are extremely frustrated in the past couple weeks. Nothing is moving. Doesn't appear to be any movement on this government's part. My question to the minister is, what is the department now prepared to do to help to resolve this dispute or to get back those two parties back to the bargaining table? What is the department planning to do?
Thank you for the question, member, and direct that question to the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the member opposite for his question because, in fact, the department's concern is entirely focused on the care of the residents. And our preference would be that that care be provided by the union members that are currently now out on strike. And I think that there's absolute agreement all around that they would provide the best level of care. But given that we are in a situation where there is a disruption in services, that the best that can be done from the point of view of RRSS is to try to care for those residents and give whatever comfort they can by doing so to the families. And from the point of view of the from the point of view of the department, we are in there with our care coordinators that as part of their job, they're trying to assure that the appropriate care is being provided to the residents and is liaising with the families. And so in the meantime, that is what's being done by the department.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Clare.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'll try again. We know that there is an impasse. Nothing is moving. My question again to the minister, what is this minister, this government planning to do to resolve this dispute?
Thank you for the question. Direct that question to the Minister of Community Services.
Again, this is a dispute between an employer and a union. The best that we are able to do is to provide whatever assistance we can to the residents through the care coordinators and to their families, and hopefully this difficult time will work its way out between the two parties that should be at the negotiating table.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Clare.
I agree with the minister. You know, these two groups belong to the bargaining table, but unfortunately, there has been a breakdown in those talks. The minister is fully aware of that, and my question was simply, you know, what is the department planning to do to resolve this labor strike?
Question to the Minister of Community Services.
So, Mr. Chairman, I try to make a point of it when a former government has done something right in their time to acknowledge it in my comments. And I think the member opposite would acknowledge that there was some recognition that the government that he was part of played a part in coming together with the uniform level of care that is enjoyed across the province, and indeed that would involve, Mr. Chairman, coming up with the $13.70 as an appropriate wage for the training that is required by those employees, by those caregivers, and the responsibility that is borne by them. So I want to acknowledge the member opposite as a member of that government that worked on coming up with the $13.70 an hour. He came up with a lot of other initiatives which added $3.6 billion to the provincial debt, which has made it more difficult to fund other programs. But I do think that it was a good thing that was done in the Community Services Department during that time. And it is this government that has come up with the $28 million and has put more on the table to fund those wages. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Clare.
Mr. Chairman, I know what our former government did for the small options home. What I want to know, and a lot of people want to know, is what is this minister, this Tory government planning to do to help to resolve this dispute?
Thank you for the question. Direct the question to the Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, as I've indicated on a few occasions, we honored the commitments to the employees. We came up with another $28 million to fund a proper wage package that recognizes the responsibilities and the training of those caregivers. And we have not only done that, Mr. Chair, but we have also been prepared to put more on the table to the sector this has been done. Some of the unions in the sector have accepted this, and the other non-unionized employers would have the same available to them through their per diems.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Clare.
Mr. Chairman, we're all aware that we may need some additional funding brought to the table in order to resolve this walkout. Mr. Chairman, as you're aware, that when this government has been able to find all kinds of new funding, and I'm not going to sidetrack at this time. My question to the minister is, if, and more than likely the answer is yes, the question will be, if more funding is needed to resolve the strike, is the department willing and ready to provide some additional funding to help to bring this strike to an end? Yes or no?
Thank you for that question. Direct the question to the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would like to confirm that substantial additional resources have been provided to the sector, and indeed that is why we are seeing settlements and with 3 other unions, and of course those others that were close to settlement, and plus all the other non-unionized service providers would have also had that made available to them through their adjusted per diems.
The member from Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have seen settlements, I agree. Unfortunately, we have an impasse right here that has been going on for probably 16 days now. What is this minister planning to do to help to resolve this labor dispute? Anything?
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and as I indicated earlier in my comments, there is a substantial additional monies put into community supports for adults program, and it was something that I had to explain to my cabinet colleagues when we came forward and produced these estimates, and I would suggest to the member opposite that those concerns have been brought forward and they have been recognized in this budget.
Thank you. Recognize the member from Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, again, we are at an impasse. We are hearing some individuals outside, and you can't blame these individuals, calling upon this minister, upon this government, for some real leadership to help. We have seen parents, we have seen family members calling upon this government to step in because nothing is moving right now. We don't anticipate anything is moving and will be moving in the near future. My question to the minister, what is he planning to do to help move these talks forward in order to try to resolve this strike, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you for the question. The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and actually I think that perhaps it should be pointed out that there has been a conciliator that's been in place for some time. He filed his report, but that conciliator would be available to the parties should they wish to call on him again, and I certainly hope that they choose to do so.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the obvious question, what happens if either party decides to call in the conciliator to help move these negotiations forward? What then is this Minister of Community Services planning to do?
Minister of Community Services.
I would be very pleased to see the parties make use of the conciliator again. And again, during my time in Environment and Labour, I saw the wonderful work of those conciliators, often bringing about successful conclusions to very difficult labour negotiations. And really, sometimes I found them to be just amazing. And I certainly hope that both parties make use of their conciliator, and it leads to a negotiated collective agreement. agreeable to both sides.
I recognize the member from Clare and leader in the House of the Liberal Caucus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the minister we have been asking for quite some time now, you know, the obvious question that these workers out there have been asking for is wage parity. You know, they are doing, Mr. Chairman, the exact same work as other people in that same line of work are doing. You know, these individuals, there is no question about the dedication to their profession and the loving care and compassionate care that they provide to these residents. Again, to the minister, does the minister agree or doesn't he agree that these individuals, these devoted, dedicated individuals, don't deserve wage parity? Yes or no?
Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the member opposite for his question. Once again, I would remind the member that, in fact, they do have geographic wage parity. There are about 5,000 employees involved in providing community supports for adults across the province. And in fact, that geographic wage parity has been funded by this government, and it's being funded in a way that it's sustainable. And in addition to that, we were able to make substantial additional allocations to allow for the collective bargaining process for those that have unionized employees, and for the appropriate increase in the per diems for those that have non-unionized employees.
The member from Clare.
Mr. Chairman, when you look at the responsibilities of these individuals and the type of work that they do compared to other individuals within the Halifax Regional Municipality, the same type of work is being provided by these group home workers as other individuals are providing at the Nova Scotia Hospital. But yet, there's almost $5 difference in wage salaries per hour. My question to the minister, does he or doesn't he agree that these group home workers deserve wage parity with some of their colleagues that are doing the exact same work here in HRM? Does he agree or doesn't he agree?
Recognize the Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Chairman, the member opposite is making reference to, I believe it's 32 workers that are employed by the Department of Health. And what he's suggesting is that they have a comparable job description. It's a different sector, there are different circumstances. We think a more appropriate comparator is the other 4,750 people that are involved in community supports for adults that do have geographic wage parity at a cost of $28 million that has been funded fully by this government. And we have, Mr. Chairman, again, made additional allocations that have led to successful collective agreements with several other unions.
Thank you, Minister. The member from Clare.
Mr. Chairman, when you look at the responsibilities of these individuals, you know, the type of work that they do, you know, yes, and I agree with the minister, they're both in different settings. I agree. But the work is practically the same. Same responsibilities as one as the other. But yet, there's roughly a $5 difference between what these group home workers are earning and what these other councillors are earning. And my question again to the minister, does he agree or doesn't he agree that these workers don't deserve wage parity?
Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would point out to the member opposite that, in fact, prior to this government providing wage parity across the community supports for adults sector and all the training that went into it and the improved level of care for the residents, which the families tell us are so important to them, and clearly the residents are responding well to it. It's a joy to see them. When they're well cared for, they're happy, and it's just a pleasure to meet with them. But clearly, we have to look at what is the appropriate comparison, and I would suggest that the 5,000 people that are involved in the provision of services for community supports for adults would presumably be the appropriate comparator. And we are providing that geographic wage equity that the member opposite is speaking to, and I'm sure he's very pleased that we have honored those commitments.
Recognize the leader in the House and the Liberal Caucus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if the department does not lift the ceiling of 2%, which we have been on, hearing about for quite some time now, Mr. Chairman, this strike that has been ongoing now for 15 days, what purpose would there be for these individuals, for these workers, to return back to the bargaining table with their employer without a change in their mandate? With a conciliator or a mediator to come to the table with no additional money, apart from their 2%, and 2%. I'm just trying to find out what exactly is the incentive for these individuals to get back to that table.
Direct that question to the Minister of Community Services.
The difficulty clearly in a strike is nobody likes the situation. I know that those caregivers that are on the picket lines miss the residents. They become family. This is difficult for them. It's difficult clearly for the residents. It's certainly difficult for the families, and I think it absolutely troubles everybody, including all the members in this chamber. I would encourage the union to consider what is going on in the sector and look at how we have substantially increased the funding to the sector, how some that were once making $6 an hour just a few short years ago and perhaps did not have the training to provide the level of care that's necessary for these residents are now making $13.70 an hour, and more has been put on the table for them. I would suggest to the member opposite that we are not only providing this for them, but we're doing it within the confines of a balanced budget, which gives us the confidence, that can give Nova Scotians the confidence that they will be able to continue to sustain these services for the residents.
Thank you, Minister. I recognize the member from Clare.
Mr. Chairman, for the few moments that are remaining in our time, I will be passing the floor to my colleague from Cape Breton West. But in closing, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe that I'm the only one that can't understand why this minister, why this Tory government refuses to make an investment in the care and protection of our most vulnerable citizens here in the province. I just can't understand. But yet, they can go borrow $118 million to try to fund election platform that will be coming out very shortly, to fund $155 checks that will cost $68 million. And mind you, Mr. Chairman, not everyone in Nova Scotia will be getting those checks. There's over 300,000 Nova Scotians that will not be getting these checks. So we can, this Tory government can go ahead and borrow $68 million. They can borrow $118 million. But when it comes time to try to provide the care and the protection that these vulnerable people in our society needs, this government, this minister is nowhere to be seen. Mr. Chairman, I will pass the rest of my time to my colleague from Cape Breton West. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to thank the member from Clare for his comments. I'd like to recognize the member from Cape Breton West with 14 minutes in turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two issues. One is a constituency-related matter. It's with regards to a constituent. She's an elderly lady. Well, she's not quite 60, but she is, and I've been given permission to raise this with the minister, and I'll provide whatever appropriate detail is required to confirm my permission to discuss this on a future moment. She is a lady that's very sick. She has cancer. She has no indoor toilet facilities. I believe the minister is familiar with this case. She has been, in my view, jerked around by the Department of Community Services for the best part of 5 or 6 months. As the minister well knows, this lady, who has cancer and has been receiving radiation treatment, she's lost her hair, she was forced to go out, the indignity of going to an outdoor privy through these winter months, which were absolutely terrible by any measure. At the local level, the local caseworker did her level best to try and have like an indoor washroom facility. It all came down to a few $100. And then when it started hitting the higher levels and the bureaucratic levels, you know, hierarchy within the department, everything stopped dead. This lady, till this very moment, does not have an indoor washroom facility. She has to go outside. She had no problems when she was healthy. But when she developed cancer and pleaded for help from that department, they jerked that poor lady around and put her through the indignity of even going through an appeal process, of which he was told, we will not give you your indoor washroom facility, but we will give you a chemical toilet because that's what we can provide. This lady cannot be exposed to chemicals. And you know, officials within the Department of Community Services said, too bad. This is what we're offering you. And when you figure it out, Mr. Chairman, the differential on the cost were negligible. Negligible. And that's why I asked if the Deputy Minister was going to be here today, because she was involved in that case directly. Now, how can the Minister say that this is a compassionate government helping disadvantaged individuals? The Minister himself stood in this House not more than a week ago saying that one of the great things that this government does is provide financial assistance to help seniors and those that need indoor washroom facilities and upgrade their septic installation of on-site sewage. And yet, this is the way you treat a very sick lady. I say shame on you, Minister, shame on your department, and shame on the government of Nova Scotia for treating this lady in such a cruel, harsh, just dishonorable manner. I attended the hearing with this individual, who, by the way, Mr. Chairman, had to go through the indignity of trying to get a neighbor to change a tire on a car. She only had the donut, the spare tire, and drove 35 kilometers through harsh winter conditions, even to get there, if she even wanted to have her case heard. And a one-man appeal, one-person appeal. What happened to the old tribunal, where 3 persons would sit there? You know, everything was revamped so as to make it more difficult for those who really need help. The Minister knows what I'm talking about. This is a genuine case. This lady, and even her doctor, from what I understand, will confirm she should not be exposed to chemicals. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, but there are problems with these chemical toilets. They're new on the market. And I can speak with some authority on this. And the Minister only has to check in the Department of Environment and Labour to know this with my license. But you don't expose somebody with cancer who's receiving chemo treatment to chemicals, toxic chemicals, which she would have to regulate, you know, herself. Where is the compassion and where is the heart in this department? Mr. Chairman, I cannot emphasize how cruel this case is. And for people, and even when I attended the hearing on this lady's behalf, do you know what I found so disheartening? To discover through this process would the department officials say, oh, well, we want this individual out of her home, even though she's been there all her life, and it was her father and mom's home. You know, it was good enough. It was good enough a month before Christmas that they installed a new oil tank, a new chimney, and then when it came to this here issue, they say, no, we can't give you that because this house is condemned. You shouldn't be there. Well, why did they encourage her to stay there with a new heating system? I mean, there's something wrong in that department. There's something even more wrong, Mr. Chairman, when a senior official at the local level will try and entice this lady to come to drive all the way from her home. She can't hardly walk, let alone drive. She can't afford to drive. Invite her into town so that she can be tested to see if she's mentally stable to stay in her own home. And yes, Mr. Chairman, she will confirm this, publicly or privately. Now, I would ask this minister and this department to get a handle on what the heck is going on. You got $11 million from the federal government, and you only spent $2 million. And you're going to dilly-dally around as to whether you're going to help the disadvantaged in this province? Take some of that $9 million and put some compassion back into the Department of Community Services. Put some help with this lady where it's needed. Prevent her from the further indignity that you and your department officials have put her through. Mr. Chairman, I find this process absolutely sickening when I see the vulnerable people of this province being treated in the manner that this government and this minister's department has treated this lady. It's not her fault that she has found herself in this predicament. But God forbid that we should treat people that are sick with a terminal illness to be exposed to chemicals that they should not be exposed to over a few $100s. And you know, the caseworker, I dealt with the caseworker at the local level on this lady's behalf. And it came down to arguing over 25 feet of sewer pipe. That was the difference. That's how close we were to having a contractor fulfill that lady's request. And you know, and I look across and I say, all the bravado, you know, we're going to give $155 back to everybody to see if we can get elected. How sickening when you see cases like this. She won't get it. She won't get anything because she went there. She was forced to the indignity at just about every step of the way. Now, why was it so good for the department 1 month to help her install a new heating system, a new chimney, a new oil tank, and then come back a month later and say, oh no, that place should be condemned? Is there something disconnected? I mean, does something not add up here? That I find most disturbing when I sit here and I listen to the government muse. And that's what's happening. The minister will muse about the $9 million that he's got in hand, federal money that was sent down, not provincial dollars, sent down to help people like this lady, the disadvantaged, those that need help. She has running water in her home. It's good. They had a new well installed. They got a cistern well. They have electrical. They had the electrical upgraded, you know, about 10 years ago. I spoke with the local councillor for the area. He seems to agree that it's as good as any home he's been in. I've been in her home. I mean, it's clean. You could eat off the floor. She'd treat you with the greatest of respect. You know, what little she has, she's the first to go to the cupboard and put it on the table for you. Where's the compassion? There was more money spent on bureaucracy trying to prevent this lady from getting help than there was putting the money where it was needed the most. That's what I find very, very disheartening. You know, it defies all logic. over a few $100. You know, that would have been the rebate for 2 or 3 Nova Scotians that you're trying to buy a few votes with. You know, how can we, in all conscience, sit here and support a budget in that department, knowing that this is what's happening, knowing full well? You know, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, I always try and deal with the staff at the local level. I think that's proper protocol, because MLAs shouldn't be involved at that level unless there's a breakdown in communication or process or whatever. Or, you know, in rural Nova Scotia, many constituents, they come to their MLA because that's their only conduit, at least they feel that's their only vehicle of access to government and the bureaucracy. But I tried to steer this lady, you know, in the right direction. And I give full credit to the caseworker who worked on this on the front lines, but went up to her superiors. Oh, no. And yes, I did speak with the deputy minister, because the foot dragging, because at mine it's 28 degrees below zero, she's forced to go out, you know, in the edge of the woods in her property after receiving chemo treatment. It's great to sit in the Eiffel Towers in the nice cushiony offices, you know, collecting big salaries. But what about the people that we were sent here to protect? You know, I've listened to the rhetoric about all the issues on both sides of the strike out here. But every day, if ever there was a day that would convince me to stay in politics, it was the day that we got the word that your department said no to this lady. That, to me, was the turning point in many respects of my political career, knowing that people like this are still being abused. It's absolutely, I don't care what politics you are. Get a handle on what's going on in that department. If you got $9 million to spare, put it to good use and stop making people like this lady suffer unnecessarily. Mr. Chairman, I realize my time has come to a close. The minister knows the case that I'm speaking of. And when I have an opportunity to grab my file, I will provide the documentation that allows me to speak publicly on this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'd like to recognize now the member from Dartmouth North in the NDP caucus, time being 5:12. And member, you have until 6 and until the time of interruption. Then we'll carry on from 6:30 to 7:01. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to begin by where I've left off, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time because the budget estimate hours, there's not many hours left, and there's a tremendous amount to be covered under the Department of Community Services budget. I just want to say to the minister that there was supposed to be first of all, I'll ask this question. You know that we are concerned, Nova Scotians are concerned, and it doesn't serve anyone's interest to keep those councillors out on the picket line, or to make the family members more vulnerable than what they are with the residents in that service, and to simply leave them on the edge of suspense with respect to addressing this issue. I guess the minister, you sat alongside of your cabinet partner, the Minister of Labour and Environment. I'm wondering, Minister, have you ever talked or communicated with your Minister of Labour and Environment to try to get both the union and the board back to the negotiating table in the best interest of the families and the vulnerable residents of RRSS and the union?
Thank you for the question. Direct that question to the Minister of Community Services.
Yes, and what the member opposite is referring to is the conciliation services that are provided through the Department of Environment and Labour, and I guess that I would have to say that it does not require the intervention of the Minister of Environment and Labour to provide the services of a conciliator, and in fact a conciliator has been assigned to the case, and that is what the member opposite I think is referring to in terms of that department's role. And as was mentioned earlier, they do wonderful work in conciliation, and I hope that that conciliator has a chance to do so again.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. In the Community Services Supplementary Book, page 4.6, there is a definite increase in the community supports program for adults. I guess there's somewhere close to about $4.5 million. The minister had indicated in his speak to the House that there was some $12 million in this budget this year for persons with intellectual disabilities, unless I've misread the minister. And I'm wondering if the minister is aware of the fact that there had been no significant increases, I believe, in about approximately 10 years for individuals who live in these homes as a result of food, as a result of a food budget, and there has been no increase in approximately 10 years with respect to the clothing allowance and/or the comfort allowance that they normally receive. And now I'm talking about the vulnerable residents. So to the minister, can the minister enlighten me as to, in fact, there has been increases, what years those increases have happened, and what the status of the comfort allowance, the clothing allowance, and the food budget is for those individuals?
Thank you for the question. I direct that to the Minister of Community Services. The Minister of Community Services.
This is going back a time, but I think what the member opposite is referring to is the components of the per diem as it's put together. And I believe that it's well understood that the wage component in providing the care, which is the largest component that makes up their per diem, has increased substantially in the last few years. You're talking about the other living expenses such as food and clothing. There was an increment in '97. I'm advised it was approximately 2%. And where there is necessary to make adjustments, it's done on a case-by-case basis as they tailor their per diem to the care of the resident.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Dartmouth North.
So what you're telling me, Mr. Minister, is that there has been no increase in approximately at least 6 years, and that in fact this is based on a judgment call by someone who's responsible, and in this particular case, it might be one of the small options providers for small options homes and those individuals in that small option home. So I guess what you're saying is that this doesn't go directly to the client. This is something that is reviewed by the board or even possibly by the counselor. I'm not clear. And I'd like to have some clarity with respect to how this happens and why there hasn't been an increase since 1997.
Thank you, member. The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, the member has a good knowledge of how the services are delivered through the per diem system, and indeed it is one of the 378 service providers that would be aware of the specific needs of each of their residents, and through that service provider they would speak with the care coordinator and they would look at the per diem for that resident and to ensure that it is meeting the requirements of good care.
The member from Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the minister knows that there has been an ongoing review with respect to community supports for adults. I guess I would ask the minister, where is that review in progress today? What's the progress of that review today with respect to community supports? And how is it being done? And what is its budget? That would be my question to you.
The Minister of Community Services. Minister of Community Services.
Yes, I want to thank the member opposite for his question, and the member opposite I would like to acknowledge is a very caring individual. He's very passionate and watching out for the less fortunate in the province, and I would like to say that we would all try to emulate that trait. And along with that, he's very passionate about the Community Supports for Adults program. And this is something that flows, I would suggest, from the Kendrick report and what's happening with the Kendrick report. And as the member would be aware, because he has given me an opportunity to speak to this, the Community Supports for Adults Renewal Initiative is something that is being embraced by not only the residents, the families, the caregivers, the advocacy groups, are involved in using things like the Kendrick report and the other huge volume of knowledge that is out there to look at the whole delivery of that program. And I think the member opposite would know that it has been many years, certainly long before I ever thought about getting involved in politics, since this was last done. The budget is contained within that division of the department. But having attended at least one of the working sessions of the Community Supports for Adults Renewal Initiative, I was certainly very impressed with the enthusiasm that was being embraced from all participants in this process. And I thank the member opposite for bringing this up. I think it was a wonderful initiative of my predecessor and staff and the sector and everybody else involved in this.
Thank you for those comments. Minister, recognize the member from Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the minister is aware that the government went through great expense to have Dr. Kindred prepare a report called the Kendrick Report. And the minister is aware that there were many, many recommendations within the Kendrick Report with respect to this very issue of community support for the adults. And my question is why is this review being done when the Kendrick report was submitted to this government some 2 years ago? And why are the advocacy groups who are involved in the Kendrick report somehow being left out of this? Or it gives me the impression that they're somehow being left out of this. So I would ask the minister to entertain those questions. Thank you.
The Minister of Community Services.
I thank the member opposite. The Kendrick report is one piece of evidence that is being used to address the renewal initiative for community supports for adults. It is just one of many, and I would suggest to the member opposite that, in fact, a lot of the advocacy groups that participated in that are involved with the renewal initiative. There is a committee within the renewal initiative, in fact, that will screen everything before it comes to me for my consideration, and this is a way of ensuring that valuable input from the people that are closest to delivering the services, or the families, or in fact some of the residents that are involved in the program have input into ultimately what should come out of this later on this year.
The member from Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The minister is very much aware that, once again, as I've said, this Kendrick report came at great expense to the taxpayers. I don't know what the government has done with respect to the response to the Kendrick report, My question to you, Mr. Minister, would be is, have you reviewed the Kendrick report? What is your government's response to the Kendrick report? And is it possible to table your responses to this report? Because, Mr. Chairman, I have heard no responses from this government in over a year with respect to the Kendrick report. This government, under the former Minister of Community Services, has indicated that there would be a response. And he had stated that in time, this government would review the Kendrick report, they would have a response to it, and that in fact the stakeholders of that group of organizations who came together, those 47 advocacy groups, would be informed. So my question is, I guess, to the minister once again, is what is the government's response to the Kendrick report, and can you table the responses to that Kendrick report?
Thank you for the question. Direct that to the member from King South, also the honourable member, Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Threw you off a bit, dear Minister.
Mr. Chair, I always appreciated your manners here in the chamber, and in response to the member's question, the Kendrick report was commissioned by the department. There were certain things that were looked for in Dr. Kendrick's report. We were anxious to get best practices models in place. Also to be able to move towards a regulatory system. Some of the things that were asked for in that report are not, in fact, included in the report, although I would suggest that there is a lot of really good information that Dr. Kendrick did provide us, and as such, it provides a valuable tool in moving ahead with the renewal initiative, and we look forward to the people that are served by the Community Supports for Adults program and their families, and indeed the whole province, because we are judged by how we treat those that are most vulnerable in society. I think that we will all reap benefits from the time and the money that was invested in producing the Kendrick report, but through the Community Supports for Adults initiative, and to finish addressing some of those things that were not covered over in its entirety in the Kendrick report.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess the minister is telling me that the Kendrick report is encompassed within the initiative of supports for adults, and that comes to the table when there's a recommendation that can be adopted from the Kendrick report and funneled into the community support for initiatives and then enacted upon. I guess is that what the minister is telling me?
Thank you, member. Direct that question to the Minister of Community Services.
That is one of the sources that the people involved with the renewal initiative look to for guidance. And yes, in essence, the Kendrick report is one of those references that they will be relying on to come out with recommendations to bring forward to the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the minister in his speak today spoke passionately about the government's Bill 62, which were brought in employment supports and income assistance. And and that bill was designed specifically to move people from the welfare roll to work, to make them self-sufficient. And the minister of the day, the previous minister, said there could be nothing better, and we agree. There's nothing better than someone having a job. Those employment opportunities are great, but they must be meaningful jobs, and there must be meaningful employment, and so that individuals at a future date can find themselves completely off the welfare roll without having to be income supplemented and so on. My question is that the minister said that during the 4-year term of his government that some 9,000 people had been moved out of income assistance, and I would assume that when he says that he means that they may have been, out and got employment because of the growth in the economy and so on, and there were employment opportunities. He did say that the employment counselors do a one-on-one assessment of the individuals and prepare them for the employment field. And he did say that there's some 3,500 individuals involved in such a program. I believe he said that. I guess what I would say to the minister is this, can he elaborate on what type of jobs these individuals are now employed in, and if in fact they're jobs that in fact shove them above the low income level that is considered in Canada?
Thank you. I recognize the Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the member opposite for that question because the member has made a lot of the points that I would like to make about this program. But just to give a little bit of background in terms of what's happening with the drop in the numbers, in actual fact, those that, for whatever reason, find that they have to come to the Employment Support and Income Assistance Program and their caseworker represent a group that it's fluid. They flow through. So because there's 9,000 fewer cases now since that's been brought, or since we've come to government, is not an indication that there's 9,000 particular families that were there and are no longer on there. In actual fact, I would suggest that the turnover has been much greater. I think what it indicates is that more are going through the program and finding a chance to get meaningful employment. And as the member opposite echoed my opening comments about the opportunities provided to get education so that they become a career and something more than a subsistence job. This is exciting, I think, for the people that benefit from it. I know it's certainly exciting for the caseworkers that before were frustrated by the fact that they would have, maybe single parents that would come to them, and there were jobs out there for them, but the system thwarted them from taking them because the supports were not there, whether it was for childcare, or whether it was for travel, whether it was the fear of moving off the system and losing the pharmacare support because maybe they were diabetic or their child had asthma. Those supports have been put there that have opened doors for people that previously, I would suggest to the honourable member, were trapped in the system. They wanted a chance to get off, and speaking with some of them and the pride that they've taken by being able to work their way off the system, and some of them are just so passionate about their achievement. And of course that speaks to their self-esteem, and where there's children involved in the family, the benefits trickle down. I mean, it is really a wonderful evolution of this program. And of course, the program goes back to the uploading of community services, because this was the combination of the 66 municipal assistance programs with the family benefits program. And I also know that some of the residents in my community that, for whatever reason, find that employment is not as sustained as they'd like it to be through the winter time that used to be on the old municipal assistance program. The additional benefits that are provided to them certainly mean a lot to them, so therefore it means a lot to me. I think it means a lot to this government, and I think it means a lot to the member opposite, because the member opposite would know that some of those municipal assistance rates were troubling in terms of the amount that was provided to single unemployed man or woman. And that's been a very positive change in it. The member opposite asked me a question, and I think that I'm starting to perhaps digress, but as I have had the chance to travel about and speak to some of the caseworkers that are trying to assist their clients in bettering their lives, the passion by which they speak of how it's assisted them in being able to help clients, and the appreciation that has flown back, or has flowed back through them, really I think speaks to the success of the program. And while it may not be successful for every single person, I think it has substantially improved their circumstances and of a great many Nova Scotians. And as such, It's allowed them to make a very positive contribution to the community, to society, to our economy. And I think that it's very important to recognize that for those that are able, and not everybody on employment support and income assistance is able, there are some that are disabled and not able to accept full-time employment or any employment. But for those that are able, they want to make a contribution. These are good people, and they just need to have a chance. And this, in many cases, has provided them with the chance.
The member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The minister didn't answer my question. If the individuals who are employed through the employment support programs receive incomes that are above the low income level, and I mean the low cost of living that it would be, and the low income level as we suggest there ought to be. My question is this: this last year, your department minister, who believed in putting people back to employment through and making them self-reliant, your department cut some of the necessary items that people would need to go back to work, like steel-toed boots, like clothing, like sometimes tools and so on. And your department, my understanding is that some people have not been able to get those types of items that are needed to put them back into the employment field. My question to you, Minister, is this true? And if it isn't true, then is there some policy in the department to do an assessment on individuals to see if those needs are there or not?
The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member opposite for asking the question, because I want to assure the member opposite that things like work boots, gloves, appropriate work clothing is still something that would be provided through the employment support program. And in fact, I am advised that the largest employment support program in the province is, in fact, the employment support and income assistance component of community services. When you think of manpower, you think of HRDC, and in actual fact, we do partner well with them, and in terms of assisting clients to be able to go to community college to work on a career, they will pick up the tuition, but we provide, I think, the lion's share of the funding to make that possible. So that is there, and of course with that, they are able to keep 30% of whatever they earn, and that's their net earnings. That's not the gross earnings, which is very important. So if, as the member was inquiring about how they were bettering their situation, if, let's say, they were a family, they were getting, and I'm just going to use round numbers, a family of two, and perhaps the circumstances allowed them to get by on a budget of $1,000 a month. And because of the child care that's made available to them, the $400 a month, that the parent, and whether it be a father or a mother, is able to go out and earn $1,000, they would get to keep 30% of that. So it would dramatically increase their disposable income and greatly enhance their situation until eventually, through experience and promotions and the self-confidence that comes from being able to go out and obtain your own job and all the other things you can do to improve your circumstances, their situation allows them to earn more than what they would on the system. So this would be one example where they would add $300 a month to their budget, and that is all over and above what they would have gotten from community services.
The Dartmouth North member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, would you, to the Minister. Minister, would you agree that after the year is over and when the Department of Community Services starts providing the supplements such as pharmacare, additional daycare funding and so on, well, not necessarily daycare funding, but additional pharmacare and special needs support, what occurs after that initial year? Can the minister explain what happens then to make sure that the individual continues to stay employed?
The Minister of Community Services.
I think that the member opposite is probably referring to those cases where they've got, shall we say, catastrophic drug costs, and that the loss of the pharmacare would be devastating for them. And we do see this in Nova Scotia with, say, type 1 diabetics that may have to spend $300 or more a month, not only for the insulin, but for the strips and the other supplies. But it's not confined just to diabetes. There are things like colitis and Crohn's, which can be extremely expensive, and many other conditions. And what I would assure the member opposite, and in fact Nova Scotians that share that same concern that we all share for the care of those at least able to provide for their medications, is that they would still be able to go back to their caseworker in those cases. And if it was a catastrophic drug case, that would be factored into their budget to determine whether there was a budget surplus and they could stay on and in fact keep the pharmacare coverage.
The Dartmouth North MLA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to go to page 409 now, and it says income assistance payments, and I see that there's been a significant decline in the income assistance payments, somewhere around approximately about $6.2 million, and that's on the supplementary estimates, Mr. Minister. Now, I guess that may be as a result of some individuals moving off the welfare roll into employment. I'm not sure, but the minister will certainly explain to me. And can the minister explain to me why there's such a significant drop?
The Minister of Community Services.
I thank the member opposite for the question, and one of the benefits to society of helping somebody get on their feet and acquire a career, and besides all the wonderful things that flow to that individual, is also a social dividend to society. You're right, there are fewer people that are on social assistance. I would suggest that those that are on there are probably provided for in a more substantial sense than there was before this act came in place. I spoke of the municipal assistance and some of the skimpy rates there. Also, the special needs that is now available to all the families, and that is so crucial, so that if, for instance, somebody needs a wheelchair, as an example, in order to secure employment, as I understand it, that is something they can apply for under special needs. And there's also money that has gone into the employment support component of the program. And so while the income assistance portion is down, other components, such as the employment support, is up. And that is, of course, all to empower those clients that are able to pursue a career to have that opportunity, or in the interim, to go back to school so that ultimately they can pursue a career.
The Dartmouth North MLA.
So I guess there's a combination of events that caused the $6 million drop in employment in income assistance program, and that means that the minister shifted from that department into supports for adults, or into supports for adults, some additional $4 million. There's still $2 million missing. So I guess my question is that if that's the case, Minister, and that there is a decline in the number of individuals on income assistance, and that income assistance payments are reduced as a result of that, I guess my question is those individuals who are now presently on income assistance, They have not received any shelter increases or shelter allowance increases, I believe, in the last 4 or 5 years. It may even be longer. And I guess to the minister, since the economy in the metro area creates a huge problem with respect to the amount of one's budget that is spent on shelter, particularly because of the low vacancy rates in the metro area, I guess I would ask the minister, what process exists to examine the appropriateness of the current shelter allowance?
The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to be sure that I am clear about the monies that are going into helping those on employment support and income assistance, yes, there is a reduction in the absolute amount of income assistance that's going out on a gross basis. On an individual basis, I suspect that one would find that there's actually more going out per family as a result of the new act. But the shift that I was referring to there is in the employment support portion. Now, that is not something that would necessarily show up as an income assistance component. So I'm trying to keep the divisions in perspective, yeah. So it's not that the money has necessarily gone to community supports for adults from there, or it's gone to family and children's services. It's still being focused on those people that would qualify for employment support and income assistance. What was the question? With regards to the shelter component, I think the member opposite would agree that a lot of the municipal shelter components were not particularly generous, and there would have been an increase there, but he makes a point about the tightening housing market and the low vacancy rate, which has a tendency to drive up rents, which becomes problematic if you have limited means when you go looking for a place to rent. And I think that's the member's point, and there is an ongoing review now looking at that, in fact, across the province. That's an internal review within that division of the department.
The Dartmouth North MLA.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the minister. The minister knows that there can be an ongoing review, but he knows the crisis situation that exists now. When a person receives income assistance in this province, the person is allotted a budget, and the budget is allotted specifically to a shelter component, and the other allotment is to personal allowance. And because of the cost of shelter, many people take out of the personal allowance budgets in order to offset the cost of their shelter. They don't want to live in slum landlord housing units. And that comes back to the Department of Housing, but I'll deal with that at another time. What happens here is you can do an ongoing review, Minister, but if the ongoing review doesn't meet the areas of crisis now, it does very little for those individuals. Many of those individuals then, in turn, have to you go to the Department of Community Services, get an over expenditure on their budget because they can't meet the period of time in which they then in turn have to pay back out of their allotted monthly allotment. And when you think of there has been no increase, and if you're talking about back when municipal government provided this, that's some 10 years ago. And I do know that even for single persons, that in fact there has been a reduce in their shelter component, and the maximum is $235 for an ABU, an able-bodied unemployed individual. There's not a place in this metro area that you can rent for $235 a month. There's not a place. A family with a maximum of 3 in the family, the maximum allotment is $600 a month. Now, we know that we don't have the public housing stock available, so they're out there in the private market. There might be some rent supplements available to them, but we do know that they have a specific budget. And in that specific budget, they're requested to provide X number of dollars for their shelter component. It's a need, it's a must. It's a place that keeps them safe. It's a place that shelters them. There's no alternative to having a roof over one's head. So when the minister stands here to me and says that we're reviewing it, then I'm wondering how long is the review going to take, and what does your department do when they consistently see that individuals on income assistance are paying more than the allotment that they're given by the department?
The Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And the member opposite is speaking actually of a Canada-wide problem, because now you're talking about the housing shortage. And indeed, this is one of the things that I think encouraged the federal government to get back involved in housing. And this was the agreement that we were one of the first provinces to sign last year, the Affordable Housing Initiative. And money has been put into the Housing Corporation. And as the member pointed out, in fact, I believe it is the 31st of May will be the opening of the first of those units that he mentioned in Middleton. But this is just a start. It's a move in the right direction. The member opposite is quite correct in that there is a shortage of housing. It is driving up the rents. That is something that the caseworker tries to work out with our clients that are there. For those that are single, able-bodied, unemployed, yes, the amount is for rooming house. It is substantially more for a family, and appropriately so. But actually, with regards to the difference between what we're paying the single unemployed now and some of the municipal rates I'm familiar with from my time as a councillor, I would still regretfully suggest that this is much better than it was, at least in some municipalities in southwestern Nova Scotia.
The member for Dartmouth North.
The minister implied, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The minister implied that he was reviewing the shelter component of this allocation to persons on income assistance. He said that he understands there is a need to review that because of the cost of shelter. What I'm asking the minister is that if he understands reviewing that there needs to be a review, and the department hasn't provided an increase, what are you doing now to assist those individuals so that they don't have to take out of their total basic allotment in order to have decent shelter?
The Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, honourable member, for your question. I would suggest that the first step to identifying what should be done with the shelter rates is to identify those areas of the province that are experiencing some duress, and to try to come up with what would be an appropriate amount for those areas. And I think that the member opposite is probably referring first and foremost to HRM, because this is an area that's experiencing considerable growth, and it is more difficult to get proper housing here in the city, and as it becomes increasingly scarce, the rents are rising. That is a concern, and that is one of the reasons why we're doing this. In the meantime, we would hope that the clients would confer with their caseworkers, and I have found that the caseworkers and the supervisors are wonderful when they're presented with situations that allow them within policy, and they feel that the need is legitimate. I have found from the time before I was elected to the legislature that they are very compassionate, and if they felt that the need was justified and they could find provision under the policy that it would be done.
The member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to say to the minister, the staff of the Department of Community Services and those caseworkers whose responsibility it is to implement policy and to work within policy do a fine job. So do the supervisors of the department. But, Mr. Minister, they work within the policy set forth. And if the policy does not allow them flexibility, then there's no flexibility for them to move. And so there's, if in fact the budget item says for a family of two, or your $525, for example, or a disabled person $535, or whatever the case may be, that's developed within the policy. That's as far as they can go. And there is no flexibility, from my understanding and my working, within policy. There are some small ranges of areas that you can compensate in other areas, but when it comes to shelter component, the policy is quite clear and often quite rigid. My so my question to the minister is are you telling me that there's flexibility by the department staff to work within policy, and there's flexibility to move within that policy if in fact individuals find a need for additional monies to provide for shelter?
The Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Honourable Member, for your question. The Honourable Member points out that there are provisions in the policy that determine what can be made available to a family or to an individual for a shelter allowance, and that is one of the components in their budget. I think that the member opposite would welcome, though, the special needs provisions that have come forward. This does not speak specifically to the shelter, but what it does is that many times under the old policy there was no flexibility there to handle other things that were perhaps taking away from the shelter allowance. So there is an improvement in that area. I accept the member opposite's point, though, that there is pressure on the rents, particularly in HRM. It is becoming more difficult for people that rely on community services, and this is where we're partnering with housing services within the department, and we're trying to increase the supply of public housing stock and rent supplements and the other mechanisms that are available to assist people with obtaining affordable housing. It's not something that will happen overnight, but the process started before I became minister, and it will continue on, and we look forward to an improvement in the stock of affordable housing in the province.
The Dartmouth North member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I did tell the minister that I would bring my concern to address my questions with respect to housing at another time, and hopefully I will have time during these estimates to do that. The personal allowance of $180 to each individual who is on social assistance is totally inadequate. That personal allowance covers everything from food to clothing and other personal items that are needed. I don't know when the minister's department has reviewed that $180 allotment or how it has arrived that this is the number that will sustain a person on social assistance for 1 month. My question is to the minister, can he elaborate how you arrived at $180? When was the last increase in the personal allotment to individuals on social assistance? And when can they expect an increase, since Nova Scotians are benefiting from this government's ability to balance the budget?
The Honourable, the Minister of Community Services, and he has approximately 1 minute until we reach the moment of interruption.
Yes, thank the honourable member for his question. When the new act came in, that's when we set the $180, and in the event that that would be to the detriment of the client, there was some grandfathering at that time to make sure that nobody lost as a result of the new system that came into effect on August the 1st of 2001.
Order, please. We have reached the moment of interruption, and we'll pick this debate up again at 6:30.